Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. We're going to be talking with our good friend Eric Metaxas about his new book, If You Can Keep It. And if you're wondering about that particular topic, it goes all the way back to 1787 when the Constitution was drafted. A woman asked Benjamin Franklin what indeed they had done, and he said, a republic, if you can keep it. And certainly 2 centuries later, we're asking Eric Metaxas to explain what that means. If you're not familiar with Eric Metaxas, of course, he has written so many great books that we've talked about over the years here on Point of View. Bonhoeffer certainly is one of those. William Wilberforce, his book on miracles, and many others. And Eric Metaxas, always great to have you on the program with us.
Well, Kerby, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. I have to say I'm more excited about this book than anything I've ever written, just because it's about my country. I feel like we're in a tough spot, and this is my answer to what we can do, you know?
And I certainly want to take us back to 1787, where, again, she asked, you know, what have you given us? What kind of government? And because she was wondering if it was a monarchy or whatever it might be. And he says a republic, if you can keep it. And, of course, that's the title, because you are convinced that we have this promise that was given to us, but we have to be careful to be able to keep that promise.
Well, yeah, it actually is fascinating to me. The reason I wrote the book is that it dawned on me over the last few years that most Americans are not really aware of what we have and what our job is as Americans to keep the republic, to be Americans. It's a forward-thinking concept. It doesn't mean, well, I'm American and that's it. It's sort of like holding a torch up, like the Statue of Liberty, that we're to be a beacon of liberty for the whole world, and we've got to preserve that for ourselves. We've got to make sure that the light doesn't go out, so to speak. And it dawned on me over a number of years that if America is an idea, it's not an ethnic group, it's an idea, then we, the Americans, have to know what that idea is, how it works, and what our job is. And I'm convinced that over the last 40 years, we have not been keeping the republic, that the media and the culture in general has kind of adopted this negative narrative of America. Now, maybe not you, maybe not me, but the cultural leaders, generally speaking, have done that. So patriotism, really understanding our history, celebrating our history, it hasn't been taught in public schools. And so I guess I got this idea that for 200 years we kept the republic, almost miraculously. It's an amazing thing when I looked into it, and I put all this in the book. I was staggered at what I saw, how wonderful it was. And then I realized for the last 40 years we've not been keeping it so well, and I think we're on the verge of losing it. I really believe that. And so I'm very, how do I put it? I guess I'm very passionate, and I have an urgency about this topic right now.
Certainly. And again, the idea of keeping the flame. I might just mention that certainly an individual that has been very influential in my life and in yours is Os Guinness. And you've mentioned many times the book, A Free People's Suicide.
Yeah.
We interview Os Guinness on a pretty regular basis. I know you do on your radio program. And we'll get into this idea of the golden triangle of freedom. But talk about this idea of the idea of America, because early on you get into that idea of America, and it is more than just an ethnic group. It is the whole concept of what you're trying to communicate.
Yeah, I mean, when I kind of saw it, it just took my breath away, and I felt ashamed that I hadn't really, truly appreciated this for most of my life. It's one of those things you have to be taught in school so you really get it, and you have to be reminded every holiday, every July 4th, of what we have. And again, I think to some extent we do that. But the basic thing, and by the way, I dedicate the book to Os Guinness because the central idea, what really kicked off the whole thing, is this golden triangle of freedom, which I'll talk about maybe in a few minutes. But I was going to say the idea of America, I thought the idea of self-government is such a novel idea in history, and we kind of take it for granted. And it's like somebody gives you this amazing treasure, this fragile, glorious thing, and you go, man, that's great, and you put it aside like, well, what's the big deal? No big deal. It is the biggest deal in history, self-government. What the founders thought was possible really shouldn't have been possible. It's a wild idea. And the fact that we've, been able to live as free people for all these years and have been able to spread these freedoms around the world is a staggering, staggering thing. And I finally realized that the founders, when they put the whole thing together, they said people have to govern themselves, people could govern themselves, or maybe they can't govern themselves, but we're going to try. They needed a people, and this gets back to the title, they needed a people who could pull it off, who could do it. If you create a constitution, you create our Constitution, it's really worth nothing unless the people, we the people, can live it out. And that's what I never really understood. I thought, okay, we've got a Constitution, it works. But the founders, starting with Franklin, understood that it's up to the people. So he said to that woman outside of Independence Hall, if you can keep it, freedom, liberty, self-government are not normal. They are not the kind of thing that just take care of themselves. You have to have a special people who know what it is, who rejoice in it, and who live it out, and who perform the duties of self-government. And I guess I just thought in history there had never been self-government. We forget there had never in the history of the world been self-government. What the Greeks had is just a flicker, just the tiniest flicker of what we started in 1776. And it grabbed me that the founders understood we're going to hand this over to the people. They're going to have to keep it. It's not up to us to keep it. They have to keep it. So they have to understand it. And I said, this is such a wild idea in the history of the world that they were able to pull this together in 1776, not only to pull it together, which is astounding, but to then hand it over to a people who were prepared to keep it. That is what's incredible. When you see it in Iraq and Afghanistan, when we say, hey, here's freedom, it doesn't just work by itself. You need the people to understand it. And I think that's something that is so glorious, a promise to the future Americans, but then to the whole world who's looking to us to be a beacon of liberty and to share our liberties with them, to help them learn how to govern themselves around the world, to have a free market and freedom of religion. So, well, you can tell I get excited because once you see it, it is an exciting concept.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about this book, If You Can Keep It, The Forgotten Promise of American Liberty. It has about 260 pages, and you should be able to find it in your local bookstore, but we'll have a link not only to Eric Metaxas' website, but also so that you can get a copy of the book. We've been talking about this idea of self-government and how self-government works, and a lot of that is based upon each person must know how to govern himself or herself. But when we come back, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the golden triangle of freedom. Others have referred to it as a three-legged stool, but however you describe it, there are very important elements in that, which we certainly want to begin to develop as you understand more about this promise that we need to keep, of this flame that we need to keep lit. Those are very important issues. So again, we're talking today with Eric Metaxas. If you're not familiar with some of the work that he has done, let me commend to you all of his books, whether it is some of the biographies done on William Wilberforce and Bonhoeffer, whether it's his latest few books on miracles, or of course this one, If You Can Keep It, The Forgotten Promise of American Liberty. And we'll come back and give you a chance to continue to hear the conversation as we spend some time with Eric Metaxas. All of it available on our website, pointofview.net. We'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll spend some time getting into some of the very important aspects of his book. Stay tuned. We'll have more right after this. This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson. A number of states' attorneys general, along with some state legislatures, want to prosecute people and institutions that are climate change skeptics. Back in March, 17 of these attorneys generals vowed to use the legal system to pursue fraud allegations against fossil fuel companies and their supporters, who they label as climate change deniers. In California, the legislature briefly considered, but did not pass, a bill with the title California Climate Science, Truth, and Accountability Act of 2016. Recently, I had Dr. Kim Holmes of the Heritage Foundation on my radio program to talk about this new phenomenon. He's concerned about the impact such actions would have on the rule of law. If the California law had been passed, the state would be able to use California's unfair competition law and bring charges of fraud. At the March press conference, a number of attorneys general wanted to launch an investigation of ExxonMobil. If this becomes standard operating procedure, you have to wonder what other areas of investigation might open up. Should attorneys general start investigating social scientists whose research contradicts liberals who call for more gun control? Should attorneys general begin investigating science who believe in intelligent design rather than random evolution? I suppose this was just the next step. Proponents of climate change have labeled anyone who does not support their belief in anthropogenic-induced climate change as climate change deniers. This is an attempt to marginalize any dissent by creating an obvious verbal link to the term Holocaust deniers. First, label your opponents as evil people, then label them as criminals. This tactic would probably be more effective if it weren't for the fact that some of the data for climate change has been manipulated, and much of the climate change hysteria results from exaggerated claims rather than from observed scientific operation. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Betrayal, slavery, revenge, redemption. Ben-Hur, in theaters August 19th from Paramount Pictures, rated PG-13.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
We're back once again, and we are talking with Eric Metaxas about his new book, If You Can Keep It, The Forgotten Promise of American Liberty. And Eric, let's, if we can, get into this idea of the golden triangle of freedom, because this is key to understand that there are various elements to what we today consider the American experience.
This is really what caused me to get so excited and to say I've got to write this book. Os Guinness, to whom I dedicated this book, was the one who wrote a book called The Free People's Suicide, where he outlines this idea. And I think he coined the term the golden triangle of freedom, but it's a concept, he says, all of the founders understood. And once I understood it, I was just so lit up. I said, every American has to understand this. This is key. So it's really a centerpiece of my book, If You Can Keep It. And what the golden triangle basically is, the quick version is just to say freedom requires virtue, virtue requires faith, and faith in turn requires freedom. So it goes round and round. But when I first heard it, it didn't quite make sense to me. So to explain it, the first piece is freedom requires virtue. I remember thinking, what does that mean? I don't really get that. It sounds nice. What does it mean? Freedom requires virtue. And Os Guinness explains that the most basic concept that all the founders understood was this idea that self-government, freedom, liberty requires people to govern themselves. It sounds like a tautology. People, in order to have self-government, you have to govern yourself. Well, it means you've got to have the virtue to govern yourself. In other words, if you want to be governed from above, if you want somebody to govern you from without, if you want to be governed from by someone else, you don't have to govern yourself. You don't have to have virtue. You just need to stay out of trouble. Don't commit crimes. Pay your taxes. So if you've got a monarchy, You don't have to govern yourself. You don't really need virtue. You just need the threat of prison. You know, if somebody says, I'm holding a gun on you, you better not steal. You say, okay, I'm not going to steal. Well, what about this idea that what if people could govern themselves and say, I'm not going to steal when nobody's looking. I don't need somebody to govern me. I'm going to govern myself. I'm going to do the right things more often than not. That's self-government. That's the basic guts of self-government. So liberty, freedom require virtue. If you want somebody to force you to do the right thing, that's not self-government. You're being governed. To govern yourself, you need to do the right thing, and that doesn't just go for stealing. It goes for anything. It goes for the way we live our lives. I mean, when I'm in traffic, somebody can cut in front of me, do some illegal thing. Most people in America do the right thing. We abide by the rules and the laws, not if there's a cop watching, but even if not. It's part of the culture. Generally speaking, it needs to be part of the culture. So freedom requires virtue. But then why do people do the right thing? Why do people have virtue? Well, obviously, all of the founders knew that it comes from faith. It doesn't have to come from faith in every instance, but they observed, Franklin, Jefferson, they all observed that people of faith tend to be people of virtue. It's just something that they noticed. When George Whitefield would preach and revival would come, people who were all excited about Jesus, crime went down, and people's ability to govern themselves went up. So freedom requires virtuous people. They got that. They saw that. They knew it. Then virtue requires faith. Well, they saw that in front of them. But then the third piece of the triangle is that faith in turn requires freedom. Now, that did make sense to me. I thought, why does faith require freedom? Well, basically, all of the founders saw what happens when you force faith or religion on people. They had escaped that in England. They had escaped that in many of the many countries in Europe. They had countries where you were forced to go to this church and not that church. It was coerced. Well, the founders said we have to have religious freedom because in order for faith to be real, people have to choose it on their own with no government coercion. So they created the idea of religious freedom. They said the government cannot establish a religion. The government has to be absolutely 100% impartial on the big questions of life. People will choose what faith and what approach they want to the ultimate questions themselves. So then when they do that themselves, they have the freedom to really live out their faith and to own it, so to speak. So they said real faith requires freedom. So it goes round and round. Freedom requires virtue. Virtue requires faith. Faith requires freedom. And everywhere I looked, as I was reading the writings of the founders, they write about this. And I said, why was I not taught this in school? I was never taught that freedom requires virtue. Nobody mentioned virtue. It just wasn't discussed. And it's not discussed on TV, and it's not discussed in movies. The idea of virtue being central to the Republic in the eyes of all of the founders, when you think of it, not just the Christian founders, all of them understood that virtue and faith were at the heart of this crazy experiment in self-government. It's right at the heart of the whole thing. So to be an American and not to understand that, I really felt embarrassed. I said, the whole thing works based on this concept. And all of the founders understood it, and we've lost it. Somehow in the last 40 or 50 years, we stopped teaching it, and I think it's tragic. We're going to have to teach this immediately. And so I put all this stuff in the book, hoping that people would pass these ideas on to their kids and to their friends. And most people our age have forgotten these kinds of things, unless you've been blessed with a great education of some kind. But typically, we have forgotten the very ideas that the founders said were necessary to keeping the Republic. And so I think it's no wonder that for the last 40 or 50 years, we've begun to slide away from many of the freedoms that we've had for over 200 years.
Benjamin Franklin said only a virtuous people are capable of freedom. So let's get to the next point, Eric, and that is that we also need virtuous leaders. And you addressed that issue as well.
Yeah, now by virtuous leaders, I mean the general concept of virtue. In other words, if you see somebody who's corrupt, that undermines faith in the whole system. Self-government, you really have to believe that your will is being enacted by your elected leaders, that they're doing what you've hired them to do, what you've elected them to do. If you smell corruption, if you smell that they are lining their pockets, that they're looking the other way when things go wrong, they're doing what they need to do to hang on to power, when you see that kind of corruption and lack of integrity, right away the people get cynical and people say, oh, now it's us against them. We're not governing ourselves. They're governing us. And what does it matter what I do? I become divorced from this system. And that's precisely the difficulty that happens time and time again. It's happened around the world. I saw it in Greece when I was there visiting my relatives. I said, the people here have a sense that the leaders are lining their own pockets, and so you could either opt out of the whole thing, or you can say, well, I'll get on board. I'll get what I can get out of it. So I'm going to elect this guy because I think he'll give me a government job, and I'll be part of the system. I'll become part of the them, who's in power. That is such a cynical idea. In America, for over 200 years, we've been able to basically believe that even when there's some corruption here, some corruption there, basically the system works. Basically, when I pay my taxes, they're being used for the right thing. Basically, I will pay my taxes. I won't hide my money because I feel like it's being used for illicit ends. Basically, and I say basically because, of course, nothing's perfect, but basically we believe the systems work, that our leaders are not deeply corrupt, that basically they're held to account through the press, through other things, through elections. We don't believe that our leaders lack integrity. They individually lack some integrity in terms of their own personal morality, but basically we believe that that kind of corruption, which has existed around the world since the beginning of time and exists around the world right now, we have felt that in America we don't allow that. We root it out. We scream about it. We throw those people out. We really believe in the ideals of American democracy, and when we see them go south, we shout about it. We say, we've got to fix this. This is unacceptable.
Yes.
Once people don't believe that their leaders are basically men and women of integrity and they're lining their own pockets, the whole thing falls apart. And that's why it's just vital for us to have leaders that we respect, generally speaking.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Eric Metaxas. His book is entitled If You Can Keep It, The Forgotten Promise of American Liberty. Let me encourage you, maybe as you're listening here, to maybe consider writing down some of these concepts. One, we're, of course, been talking about the golden triangle of freedom, that freedom requires virtue, and virtue requires faith, and faith requires freedom. When we come back, I want to talk, Eric, with maybe about this issue of religious liberty and how that fits into some of the conversation, and then a couple of other issues that are certainly part of this book. If you would like to know more about it, we have a link on our website to it, and also a link to Eric Metaxas' website. We've posted one or two of his commentaries from Breakpoint, giving you as much information as you possibly can have. But again, this is a book that I would encourage you to get to read, maybe read to your kids, or at least explain some of these concepts to them, depending on their age, because this is one of those forgotten ideas, and how important it was to our founders, who recognized that there is no government armed with power capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion. And so we certainly needed people of faith and people of virtue, and that's why we're talking about it today with Eric Metaxas. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation. Stay tuned. More coming up right after this.
A prince, falsely accused of treason, separated from his family and the woman he loves, forced into slavery. He returns home seeking revenge, but instead finds redemption. It's Brother Against Brother in Ben-Hur, with Academy Award winner Morgan Freeman.
If your brother is the pride of Rome, defeat him and you'll defeat an empire. Then you will have your vengeance.
Ben-Hur, in theaters August 19th from Paramount Pictures, rated PG-13. $5 doesn't buy much anymore, but $5 can change hearts and a nation. The 2016 presidential election has been very divisive, so what is a Christian to do? Kerby Anderson and the team at Point of View Radio will be here each day on the road to November, and your $5 investment will make a difference. You want to do more? Fine, do it, but please stop what you're doing and at least give us $5. Visit pointofview.net, look for the Donate Now button, or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or send your gift to Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, Eric Metaxas with us as we talk about his book, If You Can Keep It, The Forgotten Promise of American Liberty, a book that I would certainly commend to you. It is published by Viking, and you can find it in your local bookstore, no doubt. But if indeed you want some more information, we have that on our website, pointofview.net. About 260 pages, lots of great material. And Eric, I know this, and maybe some of our other listeners know, that you grew up in Danbury, Connecticut. And anybody that knows Danbury remembers that back when Thomas Jefferson was in the presidency, he actually had a letter from the Danbury Baptist Association, and that's where he coined the phrase, the wall of separation between church and state. Now, what Thomas Jefferson meant, and what I'm afraid the ACLU and some of these civil libertarians mean, is very different. But talk about that, because you, again, believe that religious liberty is a very key part of this golden triangle of freedom.
Oh, this is what I'm saying, is that we cannot function as America unless everybody pretty much understands these things. These are seminal ideas, and the fact that the ACLU has been able to get away with misinterpreting what all the founders understood about religious liberty, dramatically misinterpreting it, seeing it as the opposite of what the founders saw, is just horrific. We the people, have to take the country back, and unless we understand these things, we can't do it. So I really did write the book, again, to arm my fellow Americans with these ideas so that we don't have to kind of be governed from above, that we can say, no, this is what the country is about, this is what it's been about from the beginning, this is why it works. And one of these central ideas is religious liberty. I never really thought much about religious liberty until just a few years ago, after my Bonhoeffer book came out. Os Guinness and others were talking about religious liberty, and I finally kind of keyed into this. And I thought to myself, gosh, the founders were geniuses in understanding what no governments had really understood ever, was that religion must be free. In order for the people to be free, they have to be utterly free to worship God as they like. But what that means, it's not worship meaning inside the church, but that you will live out your faith wherever you are, in the workplace, in the marketplace, in schools, that your faith is alive, and people need to be free to express their faith, to live it out, and to practice it everywhere. That is something that all the founders took for granted, that the strength of this country was that would take place. Tocqueville, 50 years later, I write about Tocqueville in the book, comes from France to America, and he sees this crazy thing, that religion and freedom work hand in hand. He says, in my country, religion and freedom were always seen as enemies, but in America, not only are they not enemies, they support each other. Freedom and faith go hand in hand. And again, the golden triangle of freedom, freedom requires virtue, virtue requires faith, it goes round and round. It's at the very heart of what the founders understood. But Tocqueville, coming from France, is taken aback. He says, I've never seen this before. We had revolution, blood, horrors, and a dictator in Napoleon. Our revolution fell apart. Our version of liberty did not work. Why did this American version of liberty, 50 years on, is flourishing? And he saw that a big piece of it was this idea of religious freedom, that the government doesn't say religion is bad. The government doesn't say you have to go to this church. The government just steps back and says we want to encourage faith, but we're not going to coerce it. It is utterly free. And in this day and age, that phrase that you mentioned, the separation between church and state, the wall separating church and state, which is in the letter from our second president, Thomas Jefferson, third president, forgive me, he basically is saying that we have a wall of separation between church and state because it is the state that is tempted to take over the church. And we want the state to step back and to let the churches flourish. And we will always respect that and preserve that. We're not going to tell people how to live. That must be sacrosanct and untouched by the government. Well, of course, that idea has been misinterpreted, and so you have a lot of people today, because this is not taught in schools, as I've said, most of the stuff is not taught in schools, a lot of people today think, separation of church and state means that the church has to stay out of anything to do with public life, definitely the government, but anything. The church and state are separate. Well, it's a misunderstanding of state because the state is just the government, but also it's a misunderstanding of that idea. That idea really was meant to encourage faith in the public square and to prevent government interference. So today when you have government saying, we're going to decide that no matter what you believe, you have to be a cheerleader for same-sex marriage, and you have to give abortifacient drugs if you're a pharmacist, and you cannot counsel somebody who says, I don't really want to pursue the gay lifestyle. Everywhere you look, the government is stepping in and telling people of faith, you can't live out your faith. You have to bow to this secular view of things and to this particular view of sexuality and the human person. The founders always said the government cannot do that. It is in the Constitution. They cannot establish religion. That's effectively what's going on. And so I really thought, I want to put all this stuff in one book so that people can just say, if I get this, I get it. It's you don't have to spend a lifetime studying these things, but the basics will whet your appetite to do more. And I think will whet your appetite, if you read it, to be a very proud American. I'm just bursting with pride for my country in a way that before I wrote this book, I have to say I would have considered myself a proud American. But once you really understand these things, it just changed something in me, and I hope it'll do the same for my fellow Americans.
One of the things you do so well is do biographies, and you have a whole chapter here about George Whitefield. And really, if you think about it, we would not have had the American Revolution without the First Great Awakening, and certainly George Whitefield was a very instrumental part of that, wasn't he?
Well, again, this is one of these things that once I realized this, I was embarrassed. I said, how can I have grown up and lived most of my life without knowing these things? It doesn't make any sense, and it's because we've not been keeping the Republic. Again, the title is If You Can Keep It, because I'm saying that if you can't keep it, you lose it. And for 40 years, roughly since the 60s, we have not been teaching the very basics of what does it mean to be an American. And part of what it means has everything to do with a man named George Whitefield. I never heard of George Whitefield when I was growing up. And only in recent years did I realize that without George Whitefield, there is no George Washington. There is no 1776. And again, I keep thinking, how can I have missed this? How could they not be teaching this in the schools? You don't have to like it, but you have to see it, and you have to acknowledge it. This is our history. George Whitefield, in a nutshell, was an evangelist who came here from England, and he was such an evangelist that it is hard to fathom. It's why I devote a long chapter to the life of Whitefield, because you have to really understand who he was, and it is just almost unbelievable. He comes here in his 20s, and he's a preaching machine. I mean, he would preach 4 times a day to vast crowds. He would just go someplace and put up a box or stand on something and start preaching in a voice that could be heard very, very far, without any microphone, obviously. Thousands would come and hear him. Benjamin Franklin first heard him in Philadelphia and said, I've read all these newspaper reports that this man speaks and 20,000 or even 30,000 come to hear him without speakers. I mean, this is a time when nobody heard of speakers. Nobody even could fathom it. You'd have to stand up and project your voice. So Franklin, I don't know if it's 1740 or I think 1739, hears Whitefield preaching and says, okay, I'm going to do an experiment. This is classic Franklin, right? Mm-hmm. And he starts walking backwards. Now, he's only 36 years old at this point. He starts walking backwards in the crowd, farther and farther and farther, to see, can I continue to hear Whitefield? He hears Whitefield. He walks farther. He hears Whitefield. He walks farther. He keeps hearing Whitefield's voice clearly, and he keeps walking and walking and walking until he cannot hear Whitefield's voice anymore. And there are people still standing there just straining to hear Whitefield. And he says, okay, this is as far as it goes. So he performed this experiment where he said, okay, if there are this many people, every 2 square feet, there's a person standing. And so he draws a semicircle, and he says, how many people can fit there? And sure enough, it was 30,000 people. Wow. So he says that this man really has been preaching to 20,000 15,000, 25,000, and in some cases 30,000 people. It's possible. He couldn't believe it until he did the experiment himself. So Whitefield goes around the colonies preaching to thousands and thousands of people, And this leads to what we call, you said it, the First Great Awakening. People come to faith in droves across the 13 colonies, and this prepares the way, as everybody, including Franklin, understood, for virtuous people to govern themselves, which is amazing.
I need to take a break, but we'll come back and talk a little bit more about that, but also about this idea of an almost chosen people, because that part of our history of being a city set on a hill, and of course even pulling some of the things that have been written by Eric Metaxas in the past about Squanto and others are all part of this book as well. Just a fascinating book. But again, if you just joined us, the book is entitled If You Can Keep It, The Forgotten Promise of American Liberty. We're privileged to have with us just a little bit longer Eric Metaxas as we talk about his book. And if you'd like to know more about him, his book, we have all that on our website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for the final segment here with Eric Metaxas as we talk about his book, If You Can Keep It. We were talking just a minute about George Whitefield, and, you know, Paul Johnson, even in his History of the American People, essentially said you would not have an American Revolution without George Whitefield. You certainly would not have had those preachers that were in the pulpit speaking about liberty without a George Whitefield and a Jonathan Edwards. So really, the first Great Awakening led to the American Revolution. The American Revolution led to the Articles of Confederation, and eventually we had almost a second American Revolution, because then you have the founders gathering together to write the Constitution. So again, each one of these pieces comes together, and I think, Eric, you see how important virtue and faith and freedom were in the founding and of this country, and also the founding and framing of our Constitution.
It's just a stunning thing. And again, I know I'm repeating myself, but I could not believe it when I realized that I hadn't been taught these things, and I barely knew these things. I thought, how can I even call myself an American? You need to know this stuff. We have not existed and flourished without people knowing these things. But in the last 40 or so years, since the 60s roughly, we've ceased to teach these things. We've ceased to teach about the greatness of America, about American exceptionalism, about the idea that these ideas, not the people, but these ideas are exceptional in the history of the world. They have led to other countries adopting these ideas. It is so wild and crazy and beautiful that I said, we need to be teaching this. And I put it in between the covers of this book. It's not a big book, but I said, I want everybody to get this. And there are stories in here also. I've neglected to say that there's stories about Paul Revere and things that if we don't teach these exciting stories of heroes who have sacrificed, we're missing something. Now, do you hear those sirens? I'm trying to prove that I'm in New York City. They always come when I'm on the radio. Anyway, I just have to say that the history that I learned in writing this book myself, you know when you find something and you're just bursting to share it. And so I said, I also want to write it in a way that's easy to follow. I don't want it to be, this is not a Bonhoeffer book. This is going to be 600 pages. The original title was Letters to a Young American, because I said I want this to be something that I can give to young people. But my publisher said, no, people our age don't understand this stuff. So that's when we changed the title to If You Can Keep It.
But again, this idea of American exceptionalism has really been given sort of a negative connotation.
Yeah,
but you talk about that in the book, and that's something we need to come back to as well, because it has been easily dismissed by some presidents and historians.
Yeah.
But I think really we need to come back and recognize this really is an exceptional nation.
Well, again, that doesn't mean that we're better. Everybody in the world is equal in the eyes of God. But the fact is that we, the American people, have, you could say, been chosen by God to have the honor of carrying the torch of freedom. We don't deserve to be chosen. We don't deserve it at all, any more than the Jews deserve to be chosen. But God gives gifts to people, and he says, I want you to use this for my purposes. So here we are given this outrageous gift. And again, I can't stress it enough. When you read the first chapters of the book, you see that this is just a crazy idea. We can't even believe that it worked, but it's worked, and now it's in our hands. And we have to have the tools to continue to keep the republic. And so, again, that's why I wrote the book. But I got to say that when I read about Abraham Lincoln, I thought Abraham Lincoln called America God's almost chosen people.
Yes.
Now, why aren't we teaching that in schools? That one of our greatest leaders, maybe our greatest leader, had this view, and I write about that in the book too, that Franklin bought into everything I'm saying. He got it. He wrote about it. It is amazing. He understood this. We need to, if you're teaching about Abraham Lincoln, you need to teach that he saw these things clearly, and that's what led him to be able to face the crisis of the Civil War. How can we face our own existential crisis today, which we have to face? We're in big trouble as a nation unless we know these things. So that's, part of my passion and my urgency.
Well, again, the book is entitled If You Can Keep It, The Forgotten Promise of American Liberty. And for just a minute, let's talk about what's available on your website. We always have a link to ericmetaxas.com. And if you don't know how to spell it, it's very easy because we have the link there. But it will let people know about your radio program, about your speaking, about all the other books that you have written. So talk about what people will find when they land on your website.
Yeah, they can go. My main website is ericmetaxas.com, so it's just my name, and there's all kinds of stuff. It has my schedule of if you want to come hear me speak. We post that. We keep that up to date. You can also sign up to get my weekly newsletter. I send out a weekly update newsletter, especially to let people know what I'm doing on my radio program, because people sometimes don't have the time or they missed an episode. I'm interviewing somebody, and I want to have it there so it's available for podcast. But everything that you need to know is there, and my radio website you can link to, but the actual website is metaxastalk.com, and I do hope people will go there and sign up to get the newsletter, just because it's so wonderful to be able to let people know what's been happening. People sometimes say, "Oh, I wish I would have known." And I think, well, that's why I keep telling people to sign up for the newsletter. You'll get everything you need to know.
Just before we let you go, and got a minute or two, I'd love to get to maybe some final comments about this book, because it seems to me that this is the kind of book, as you said, you want to put in the hands of young people.
Yeah.
But I think all of us need to learn these lessons, and even if you have a Yale education, sometimes you don't know all these things, and that's why it's important to read these books.
Especially if you have a Yale education. What I say is that since the 60s, we've not been teaching this stuff in the public schools, which is a scandal. But in the universities, not only have we not been teaching this, Kerby, we've been teaching against it. We have been teaching ideas that go against what I write about in this book. And I have to tell you, I'm a man on a mission. I want the whole world to know how the founders saw it and how they saw the whole thing working, because we are now in their position. They're gone. We have to carry it on. And God will judge us if we let this fall apart on our watch. This is a glorious, glorious treasure that we've been entrusted with keeping. It is ours to keep, but not for our sake. One of the main points of the book is that we exist for everybody else in the world. It's a Christian idea. We are blessed to be a blessing. So if you care about the whole world, you must care about keeping this republic. We're the ones that have sent missionaries all around the world. We have sent soldiers to protect people when they couldn't protect themselves. We have sent money and resources when people are devastated by earthquakes and tsunamis. This country has been chosen by God for His purposes, not for our purposes, but for His purposes. We are to be outward focused. It's a very biblical idea, and that's why God is at the center of it. This is not nationalistic like, hey, we're God's country. But the point is that we've got to take seriously what we've been given. We can't pretend that we haven't been given. It's like an athlete who says, I don't want to be a role model. Well, tough luck. You're in the public eye. You're going to be a role model for good or for ill. This country has been really a beacon of liberty for the whole world, and the light is going out. That's why in the cover it's the Statue of Liberty. It's fading. Yes. We, the people, have to rise up and govern ourselves. And as I say, that means everybody, not just me and you, but everybody has to know this stuff. And I hope many people will know it far better than I know it when they're through with it.
Eric Metaxas, again, the book is entitled If You Can Keep It, The Forgotten Promise of American Liberty. And we certainly encourage you to look for it in your local bookstore or to go to ericmetaxas.com. You know, before we go to the break, I did want to remind you that we are supported by listeners, and we need your help to continue bringing this kind of information every day. And if you really enjoyed the interview with Eric Metaxas and the one we have coming up here with Ray Comfort, we would certainly encourage you to visit our website, pointofview.net. We know that during August, this is sometimes the lowest amount of giving that we receive, and so this perhaps more than at any other time of the year is when we need to hear from you. And so let me again encourage those of you that have supported us before to consider a special gift, and for many of you maybe that have never given before, to visit the website pointofview.net. There's a donate button there, and we're also, of course, making available something that we've been talking about today with Eric Metaxas, a copy of the Declaration and Constitution as a thank you for your gift. Again, just go to the website, pointofview.net. Every gift is important, so we'd love to hear from you today. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to be talking with our good friend Ray Comfort, and we'll be taking your phone calls. All that coming up right after this.
I had what many would call the Cadillac of insurance plans with my company. It covered everything, and that's what got us started thinking, well, what is everything? Are we indirectly paying for people to use services that we don't believe in or want to be a part of? And MetaShare was the perfect answer for that.
I felt such relief switching over to MetaShare. I wasn't paying for anything that I didn't believe in. I was actually able to stand up for what I believe in, and I was able to put my money where my faith is.
We're part of this great program, and it really costs us less than insurance.
Learn how thousands of Christians can help you save on your health care. For your free information guide, call 855-BIBLE-11. Not available in Montana. MetaShare, affordable biblical health care. Call 855-BIBLE-11. That's 855-BIBLE-11.
Point of View Radio needs you in 2016. Join today at pointofview.net. Become a monthly partner. Pointofview.net. Or call 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour we're going to be talking about atheism, and perhaps you have friends that are atheist, and if you don't, you should certainly look around, because one of the phenomena we've talked about here on Point of View is the rise of the nones, that is, those that put none of the above, atheist, agnostic, or no preference. And so it's going to be important to know how to reach out to those people that have been influenced by the so-called new atheist and certainly believe there is no God, and how do we witness to them? What kind of impact can we have on their lives? So that's certainly why we bring back to the microphone Ray Comfort, good friend of this ministry, founder and president of Living Waters Publications. You can go to livingwaters.com and find many of his books. Of course, his television program, The Way of the Master, airs in 123 countries, the author of more than 70 books. And, of course, a lot of the videos I want to point you to. We've talked with him in the past about 180, about the atheist delusion, but also a fun book that's just come out, Fat Chance, Why Pigs Will Fly Before America Has an Atheist President. Ray Comfort, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Oh, it's great to be on your program, Kerry. Thank you.
It's always fun. You and I have interacted at various conferences over the years, and you wrote this because it's kind of the election season. It gets us into atheism, but I thought for just a minute it would be fun to talk about this because you've done the research and found that there has never been an atheist president. And really, if you go through members of Congress that are oftentimes identified as atheists, if you, as you point out in the book, go and really ask them some questions, we really don't even have any atheists in Congress either, do we?
No, it's a death knell to any political candidate who says I'm an atheist, because guess what? People don't trust atheists. They have no moral compass. Nothing is right or wrong, absolutely. Rape isn't wrong. Murder isn't wrong. Adultery is not wrong. Fornication is not wrong. They've got no moral absolutes, because if God doesn't exist, anything goes, and what society says goes. And then you can go back to Nazi Germany and say, well, that was murder and it was government sanctioned, therefore it must be okay, because that's what their moral guide is. It's just mob rule. What most people think is what they go by. So atheists can't be trusted. Some of them are nice, but I wouldn't put them in a political office where they've got power, ever.
You know, that was one of the things that came out in some of the WikiLeaks, that there were some that were trying to say, well, Bernie Sanders was an atheist. And, of course, you have a little interaction there with his brother about that. And then, of course, Barney Frank is another one that you talk about in the book. So there are some that sometimes have been given the atheist label, but when you go back and ask them, really, are you an atheist? Most of the time, they are really pretty much backed out. Maybe Pete Stark would be the closest I can come up with anybody in Congress that actually is, if you will, come out of the closet and said, I'm actually a true atheist.
Yeah, he's the one that lost his seat, didn't he, after he said that?
Could be. Yeah, maybe connected.
Americans trust atheists as much as they trust a rapist. That's what the polls say. And it's illegal to hold office if you're an atheist in 7 states in the U.S. And despite what they say about U.S. presidents, you can go on to Celebrity Atheists and other atheist sites where they actually lie about people being atheists, such as Abraham Lincoln, and etc. And you've got to remember that for an atheist, there's nothing wrong with lying. If the end justifies the means, or the means justify the ends, you just go ahead and do it.
I want to go a little bit further, obviously, because your book gets into that as well. And I would say, Ray, there are a lot of people that say, I really don't know how to talk to an atheist, because, the typical conversation is, well, I believe the Bible, and the atheist says, well, I don't believe the Bible, and that's the end of that conversation. And yet you have, and certainly many other people associated with you have done debates with atheists. Can you give us some ideas on how we would talk to a friend that maybe says, well, I'm an atheist or an agnostic? Where do you go?
Well, firstly, you've got to realize there's no such thing as an atheist. Everybody knows that God exists. An atheist is someone who pretends there's no God because it gives them license to carry out his own sinful heart's desires. Atheism opens a golden door of absolute pleasure, and it's a great joy for any, especially teenage guy whose hormones are kicking in, to carry out anything he wants to without qualms of conscience. If there's no God, then there's nothing wrong with fornication, there's nothing wrong with pornography, adultery, there's nothing wrong with blasphemy or homosexuality. Anything goes morally if you're an atheist. So you've got to realize that they will fight tooth and nail against the thought of God's existence, but we know, because God tells us so, that he's given light to every man without excuse. Creation tells us there's a creator. And it really is, with just a little bit of reasoning, quite easy to make an atheist backslide. Creation means there's a creator. Creation could not create itself. That's scientifically impossible for nature to have made itself, because if it made itself, it had to be pre-existent to make itself before it made itself. So we know the painting is proof of the painter, the building is proof of the builder, and creation is proof of the creator. But men suppress the truth and deny it and say in their heart there's no God because they don't want to be morally responsible. But there is another way to reason with an atheist, and I'm not going to really say what it is, but I'm going to put out a little teaser, if I may. We've got a new movie that's just come out called The Atheist Delusion.
That's right.
And I went to a college just to really make a little video on one of my books for a publisher, and I asked a question of an atheist that caused him to, within minutes, believe in God's existence. And I was astounded, and because I stumbled across this one scientific question, so I began going to universities and asking the same question. And we've got about a dozen atheists on film who are changing their minds about God because of this one single question. And we made the movie available on our website, and thousands of people downloaded it in the first 2 days. And in 2 months' time, we're going to release it on our YouTube channel free of charge.
Let me just mention that, too, that where you've seen the remarkable change, the first one is 180, which I mentioned just a minute ago. How you took individuals that said, well, I'm pro-choice, and you began to ask them a series of questions, and they did a 180 and became pro-life. And then Atheist Delusion asked, again, some of those very penetrating, powerful questions, kind of conversation starter types of questions that cause individuals who are convinced that there is no God to a belief that there is a God. So those are video resources which, again, are at your website, livingwaters.com, and they're available for anybody. A lot of people can find these even on the YouTube channel, especially 180, but talk about how people could use those right now in their own evangelism.
You know, the one movie that we believe is our best, a lot of people saying that, is atheistmovie.com. They can go there to see that. That's the one that'll have you in tears. Todd Friel from Wretched Radio and Wretched Television just sent us an endorsement today that we didn't ask for, and he says, forget the Hallmark Channel if you want to blub your eyes out. Mm-hmm. You're gonna see people transformed by the power of God, and it's going to make you cry. So it really is that we're very, very excited. We can't wait to release it on YouTube. We're in late September. Our YouTube channel's got 39 million views, and I'm astounded at the power of the internet to reach this world. I mean, yes. You think back, 30, 40 years when Billy Graham, etc., had those big crusades, and I understand the logistics of that. If you get 80,000 people into a stadium, that's cost a lot of money to do that, and insurances and years of preparation, 80,000 people, and a lot of them are already Christians. So when we get through the internet to 39 million people, that is just astounding, because it doesn't cost a thing. All it does is click your mouse button to get a movie into the hands of someone that you love. And so we're encouraging people to do that.
Going to take a break. When we come back, we'll certainly continue our conversation with Ray Comfort, but also wanted to give you a chance, since certainly we've had him on many times before, to give you a chance if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment. Maybe you're witnessing to some individuals, or maybe you've benefited from some of the great resources. Also, and we are, of course, talking about a couple of the different resources. One, How to Know God Exists, the booklet, The Atheist Test. Of course, this one, Fat Chance, Why Pigs Will Fly Before America Has an Atheist President. And, of course, we've mentioned the movie Atheist Delusion. Lots of great resources. They're all available at livingwaters.com. But if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. We'll continue with Ray Comfort right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
A number of states' attorneys general, along with some state legislatures, want to prosecute people and institutions that are climate change skeptics. Back in March, 17 of these attorneys generals vowed to use the legal system to pursue fraud allegations against fossil fuel companies and their supporters, who they label as climate change deniers. In California, the legislature briefly considered, but did not pass, a bill with the title California Climate Science, Truth, and Accountability Act of 2016. Recently, I had Dr. Kim Holmes of the Heritage Foundation on my radio program to talk about this new phenomenon. He's concerned about the impact such actions would have on the rule of law. If the California law had been passed, the state would be able to use California's unfair competition law and bring charges of fraud. At the March press conference, a number of attorneys general wanted to launch an investigation of ExxonMobil. If this becomes standard operating procedure, you have to wonder what other areas of investigation might open up. Should attorneys general start investigating social scientists whose research contradicts liberals who call for more gun control? Should attorneys general begin investigating science who believe in intelligent design rather than random evolution? I suppose this was just the next step. Proponents of climate change have labeled anyone who does not support their belief in anthropogenic-induced climate change as climate change deniers. This is an attempt to marginalize any dissent by creating an obvious verbal link to the term Holocaust deniers. First, label your opponents as evil people, then label them as criminals. This tactic would probably be more effective if it weren't for the fact that some of the data for climate change has been manipulated, and much of the climate change hysteria results from exaggerated claims rather than from observed scientific operation. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Betrayal, slavery, revenge, redemption. Ben-Hur, in theaters August 19th from Paramount Pictures, rated PG-13.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have with us today Ray Comfort of Living Waters Publications. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Have you had a chance to witness to an atheist? What has been your success? And perhaps if you have some comments or questions about evangelism, we are privileged to have with us Ray Comfort, and lots of resources available. We mentioned the Atheist Delusion movie and also this new book, A Fat Chance, Why Pigs Will Fly Before America Has an Atheist President. Ray, you have a section here on why atheists are so vilified, and there are many reasons, but one of those is this goes on for 4 pages, this list that you have of all the times in which the American atheists have sued, whether it is In God We Trust, sued the government, nativity scenes. This is a very long list, something we end up talking about sometimes on Friday with Kelly Shackelford of First Liberty. Whenever there seems to be even the possibility of something religious, you can expect that one of these atheist organizations is going to go out and bring a lawsuit.
Yeah, it gives them reason to exist. An atheist has got no reason to get out of bed. There's no purpose in life. There's no hope for the future, regarding death or eternity. So if they can get the limelight now, they don't care. But what they're doing is horrible. I guess they don't think very deeply. Well, obviously they don't because they're atheists, but these are Americans they're suing. These are Americans that love God and country, that love the flag, apple pie, John Wayne, the 10 Commandments. They're all in one big bag. We just love our religious liberty. 90-something% of Americans believe in God's existence. They sing God Bless America and mean it. They want to keep in God, under God and the Pledge of Allegiance. And so when atheists sue a chaplain because he wants to wear his uniform when he's not at work, or they want to sue a judge because he's got the 10 Commandments on his wall, they are stealing from us our religious liberty, and men and women have shed their blood in wars of the past to keep religious liberty in our country. And so they're making themselves odious in the nostrils of the average American. And yet, this shows how blindly conceited they are. They can't figure out why they're not very popular. They think maybe it's because they think more deeply than other people, and religious people feel threatened by atheists who are scientific in nature. And so it's quite a crazy phenomenon that's going on, that atheists are suing fellow Americans and becoming very unpopular and not knowing why.
You also talk about the fact that they paint with a very broad brush, and we've talked about this on the program as well. A lot of the so-called new atheists say, well, religion is dangerous and religious people are dangerous. But you do have at least one quote in here, which I had never seen before, where Richard Dawkins said, really, there are no Christians, as far as I know, blowing up buildings. I'm not aware of any Christian suicide bombers, not aware of any major Christian denomination that believes the penalty for apostasy is death. And you've had Bill Maher and a few others say the same kinds of things. So that argument that you used to hear from some of the atheists that, well, all religion is dangerous and thus we need to get rid of it, they're recognizing they probably have to have a little bit of nuance. But in the past, they've really painted with a broad brush and said, you religious people are the dangerous people, and we need to make sure that you don't have any kind of power in America.
Yeah, what they're doing is stripping Christians of having political power. Christians are scared to say anything because they're going to get sued by atheists for opening their mouth in public and saying something about God. But what they're doing is actually preparing the country for something worse. This is what's happening in England, and this is what Richard Dawkins recognized, that Islam takes over politically. They get into positions of authority, which has happened in London, where the latest mayor is a Muslim, and they take over. They vote in people, and they want to bring in Sharia law, where they cut hands off for theft, and they make women wear those full garb things, and stoning to death for adultery, and capital punishment for atheists, which they don't realize. And so they're playing John the Baptist for Islam, and I think I'd like to kind of challenge them on that and say, look, stop suing fellow Americans and tying up their power politically and go after the real enemy, because there's an enemy that wants to take over this country.
One other one I thought I'd put on the table, and you talk about this in the book as well, is the atheists in the past have really tried to convince us that at least 4 of our presidents, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, James Madison, were atheists. And let's give everybody a little bit of a history lesson, because they, even in the colleges and sometimes even the high school classrooms, hear that. And so what's a biblical response and a historical response?
All we got to do is look at the quotes from these guys. Just Google it, George Washington and God, and you'll find Lincoln and Washington. A lot of them weren't Christians. They weren't born again, but they weren't fools. They didn't deny God's existence. They didn't believe that nothing created everything, which is what an atheist believes, which is a scientific impossibility. They were theists. They had this understanding that the beauty and design of nature reflected the genius of God's creative hand. And so it's so disingenuous for atheists to try and bolster their case by getting these people on their side. Well, my heart goes out to these people. I sound like I'm talking harsh about atheists, but I really love them. I paid for dinner for 40 atheists recently. I sent them gift baskets. I'm friends with Penn Jillette and Lawrence Krauss. I recently interviewed Lawrence Krauss in Washington, D.C., and we became friends. We've got a lot in common. He's shorter than I am. We're both Jewish. Mm-hmm. We both talk about God a lot. And something funny happened during the interview. I did the interview with Lawrence Krauss, and Penn Jillette was in the room.
Right.
And as I was leaving, Lawrence Krauss reached out his hand and shook it and said, goodbye. And I said, that means God be with you, don't you? He said, what? I said, yeah, it's Old English. And Penn Jillette called out, no, it's not. And I said, yes, it is. It's in the dictionary. And someone yelled out, Google it. So there's about 60 seconds of just click, 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 Google. And then Lawrence Krauss says, uh-oh, here it is, Old English, goodbye, God be with you. And everybody laughed, and they said, well, we've learned something tonight. And there was quick apologies, and we left, and I said, it's great to meet you. So it was an interesting moment.
Yes, well, and you've pointed out in the book here everything from OMG and all sorts of other ways in which individuals accidentally say that. It's just amazing, because I kind of think it brings you back to Romans 1, because Romans 1 says that the creation shows his invisible power, and it demonstrates that God exists. And so professing to be wise, they became fools, because they really suppress the truth in unrighteousness. The atheists today make the argument that really the default setting really would be atheism. In other words, we didn't have all you religious people out there, that everybody be an atheist. But Ray, the problem is that we are talking about billions of people, probably 2 billion people in the world that call themselves Christians. Not all of them are obviously born again. 1.5 billion Muslim, another billion that are Hindu and Buddhist, and probably another million that are animist. We're an incorrigibly religious people, and that seems to verify exactly what we read in Romans 1.
Absolutely. I've never heard of an atheistic tribe. There's just individuals who deny God's existence because they don't want moral responsibility. I often hear atheists say religion has caused more wars than anything in history, and they even say Christianity has. Have you ever heard them say that?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, and it's just something that's continually said, and yet it's not true. 2004, World Encyclopedia of Wars, or Encyclopedia of Wars, should I say, said in 2000 up to 2004 there were 1,763 wars in history. Only 8% of that 1,763 were religious wars, and two-thirds of that 8% were done in the name of Islam. So 92% of wars in history were actually more political of nature, such as the First World War, Second World War, Vietnam War, Korean War, and they were fought in the name of Islam. In fact, if you want to look at atrocities in history, 110 million people have been slaughtered in the name of atheism, through communistic atheism. Stalin, an atheist, slaughtered 60 million people. Mao, atheist, slaughtered 40 million. Pol Pot, 1.7 million, he was an atheist. And Vladimir Lenin, 5 million people, he was an atheist. So atheism politically is a terrifying thing, and that's why most people would never let an atheist get into political power. But there's something even worse than atheism. Do you know what it is?
What's that?
Idolatry.
Idolatry.
Idolatry is when you make up your own God, when you can become president believing in God, but your God okays homosexuality, and your God okays all sorts of things that, like abortion. Hitler was an idolater. He had his own image of God that he created, and he had his own image of Jesus, and he had his own 12 commandments. So someone once said, a wise man, most I fear God, next I fear him who fears him not. And an idolater is someone who makes up a God in his own image, and it's such a prevalent sin, most Christians couldn't even define it, and yet God saw fit to address it in the first 2 of the 10 commandments. And if you look at Israel, that was their chief sin in the Old Testament, creating a God in their own image, making a God to suit themselves, some sort of idol, which didn't have moral dictates, and then they just did what they want and became lawless and brought judgment upon themselves.
Let's take a break, and we'll come back and take some phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. Ray Comfort with us, and if you had some of those statistics you'd like to look at, that's in Chapter 6 of the book we're talking about today, Fat Chance, and you will find a lot more evidence of that. Of course, Dinesh D'Souza has written about that as well. But just before we take a break, let me again remind you that Point of View is supported by listeners, and certainly as we get to the month of August, as we're in right now, that's oftentimes where our giving drops to the lowest levels. So if there's something you could do to help us during this month, we would greatly appreciate it. If you appreciate the conversation we had in the first hour with Eric Metaxas, the conversation we're having now with Ray Comfort, we would love to hear from you, and you can do that by going to the website, pointofview.net. Click on the button that says donate. Every gift is important, and so let me hear from you today. Matter of fact, as we go to a break, you might be able to give a gift right now. We'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to join the conversation, let's open up the phones. Open line, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take your phone calls right after this.
Did you know there's an approved healthcare choice just for Christians that's founded on the timeless principles in God's Word? It's not insurance. It's Metashare. Over 189,000 believers across America who love God and share each other's healthcare bills. It's about half the cost of health insurance, and you never pay for medical practices that go against your Christian beliefs. Best of all, the healthcare law includes a special provision for Metashare members, so you don't have to buy insurance or face penalties. Metashare is affordable healthcare without compromise.
Learn how thousands of Christians can help you save on your health care. For your free information guide, call 855-BIBLE-11. Not available in Montana. Metashare, affordable biblical health care. Call 855-BIBLE-11. That's 855-BIBLE-11.
Cast your vote today for Point of View Radio. Please become a monthly partner at pointofview.net, pointofview.net, or call 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
I'd like to join a conversation, 1-800-351-1212, talking about evangelism, atheism, and kind of all sorts of issues involved in our culture. So if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Before we get back to your book and some of the other issues at the hand, Ray, I thought for just a few minutes we might point everybody to your website, livingwaters.com. We have a link on our website, and you have a number of resources. We've talked about the Atheist Delusion coming out. You even have a pre-release download of resources. And again, you're really engaged in inspiring and equipping Christians in fulfilling the Great Commission. But talk about what's available and all the great resources that are available at Living Waters.
Yeah, on livingwaters.com there's a lot of free stuff. There's over 1,000 video clips that people can look at totally free of charge, and there's a lot of audio stuff that's free and downloadable stuff. The new movie, The Atheist Delusion, our best movie, is on atheistmovie.com, atheistmovie.com. That's the one we're super excited about. And you said about equipping people, that's what we want to do. We want to teach people how to share the gospel the way Jesus did. As a church, a contemporary church, we've strayed from biblical evangelism, and many of our top preachers are nothing more than motivational speakers. They should have been plumbers or electricians, but not sons of thunder in the pulpit, because they're not sons of thunder. They don't preach the righteousness of God, the holiness of God, and so we've strayed from biblical evangelism, and we've filled our churches with false converts, and what we do is go back to what Jesus said, and that's why it's called the way of the master, the addressing of the conscience rather than the intellect. And you see that happen in our movie, where we start off with the intellect, the place of argument, the contentious area. The carnal mind is at enmity against God. And then we show people how to do what Jesus did and move to the conscience, the place of the knowledge of right and wrong, preparing the heart for grace. You know, if you go into the heat of modern warfare armed with a feather duster, you're not going to be very courageous. But if we give you state-of-the-art weapons and teach you how to use them, those weapons will give you courage. And it's so great for me. I don't believe I've got a great intellect, but I can sit next to a university professor in a plane and not feel slightly intimidated, because I know that his intellect is way above mine, but his conscience puts us both on a level playing field. And once I move from the intellect to the conscience, I can speak to him as a human being who knows right from wrong, because God has given light to every man, and he knows that God exists despite what he says. So this is what we teach people how to do.
Let's see if we can maybe talk about that moral argument for just a minute, because oftentimes people say, well, how can I really prove the existence of God? And I think you just have to start with the assumption that they know God exists, even if they suppress the truth and unrighteousness. But talk about using that moral argument. Anybody that's seen the Left Behind series, anybody that's ever heard you speak before probably has heard that. But I know there are a lot of people that maybe for the first time are hearing that really evangelism needs to get back to that moral argument and to really begin to bypass the intellect and get to a person's conscience and help them see that they need the salvating, the grace that comes only through salvation.
Yeah, it's often called the Socratic method, where you ask people questions, and that's what I do. I learned it from Jesus. If you look at Mark 10, verse 17, he asked questions. Romans chapter 2, Paul asked questions. You who say you shall not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? And so when I meet people, I imitate Jesus, and firstly and say, how you doing? And I find out their name. And I don't have to wait for a couple of years to build a relationship with someone to talk to them about their eternal salvation, because they could die in a matter of minutes while I'm talking to them. So this has got tremendous urgency to it. So I say, so your name's Fred? He says, yeah. I say, Fred, do you think you're a good person? And he says, yeah. And I say, well, if heaven exists, do you think you'll make it there being a good person? He says, yeah, I think I will. So let's just check, and we'll go through the 10 Commandments. Okay? He says, yeah, sure. That's when you take him through those commandments. And you see, when Nathan approached David, and David had violated the commandments, he coveted his neighbor's wife, he lived a lie, he stole his neighbor's wife, he committed adultery, he committed murder, he violated so many commandments. Nathan didn't come to him and talk about the love of God or a wonderful plan that God had for him. He firstly told him a story in the natural about a man who stole another man's lamb, and when David became self-righteous and said, that man will restore fourfold and he will die, Nathan said, you are the man. Why have you despised the commandment of the Lord? And then David cried, I have sinned. And then from there, we see the penitent prayer of David in Psalm 51, have mercy upon me, O God. We're called to be Nathans, to in love and in gentleness say, you are the man. Why have you despised the commandment of the Lord? To approach it gently, as Nathan did, talk in the natural first, and then swing to the conscience and say you know right from wrong, and you've broken those commandments. Paul did this in Romans chapter 2, as I said. You who say you shall not steal, do you steal? You say you shall not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? What's he doing? He is speaking to the conscience, the work of the law, which is written on their hearts. Every one of us know right from wrong. There's nobody that can say, oh, I thought it was right to murder, I thought it was right to steal. No. God's given light to every man. So we need to tap into that, and we need to do it boldly. You know, if you ever watch a waitress in a restaurant, you can be a businessman in three-piece suit talking millions of dollars. She'll come walking up in the middle of that important conversation and say, are you ready to order? Mm-hmm. She knows you're there to eat. So she's bold. She's courageous. She's just butts in no matter what. And we've got something the world wants.
Yes.
The world wants to live. Every one of us have a fear of death until we come to Christ. Every minute, 100 people die. Every hour, 6,000. Every day, 150,000. And every year, 54 million people are swallowed by this terrible black thing called death. And yet we have the answer. Jesus Christ has abolished death and brought life and immortality light through the gospel. So like that waitress, we've got to be bold and butt into the conversation. The world's not going to come to us. It loves the darkness. It hates the light. Neither will it come to the light. We have to go to them. We have to go into the world and befriend them and love them and share the gospel with them. We can do that if we learn how to do it.
And again, that's one of the places you can learn it at livingwaters.com. Of course, we also mentioned atheistmovie.com, some great resources. Let me mention a few others, because in the back of your book, you talk about if you're not a Christian, you know, you have everything from the Evidence Bible, but also how to know God exists, scientific proof of God. If you're dealing with somebody who's really maybe just still kind of struggling with that, maybe they just had a heavy dose of evolutionary theory in college, maybe they were just not so sure where they believed and what they believed, and maybe they're looking for a few facts that might begin to give at least create an openness to the gospel. Wouldn't some of those resources be great to put in their hands?
Oh, absolutely, and there's things you can point to. If someone's a believer in evolution, you can dismantle that with a movie we've got called Evolution versus God. Mm-hmm. I went to university professors, scientists, evolutionary scientists that teach at UCLA and USC, and I held their feet to the fire with the help of God. I was nervous as anything, but I said, give me scientific evidence for evolution, empirical evidence. It has to be observable and repeatable. Can you please tell me evidence for Darwinian evolution? And they couldn't give me a thing. Not one of the four scientists could give me anything that would be considered empirical evidence. Why? Because it happened millions of years ago, and you can't observe it, you can't repeat it, it's all accepted by blind faith. And so you can disprove evolution by sending people that movie, Evolution versus God. And it also has the gospel, because there's no point in dismantling evolution without upholding the gospel.
Wow. Well, we're going to take a break, and we're going to let you go so that you can get on to some other activities. But I thought before we did, let's again talk about the atheistmovie.com, some of those resources that are available, because I want our people to be educated and equipped and ready to go out there and share their faith, or to use that particular video and some of the others to really begin to challenge the non-Christian worldview.
Yeah, well, the atheistmovie.com has got a new movie on it called The Atheist Delusion. It's the best thing we've ever produced, people are saying, and many people weep as they watch it because it's so moving to see atheists actually change their minds and receive light about the existence of God. It's just so exciting. But that's a $20 download, and thousands of people paid it in the first 2 days, and they're just excited about it, and there's a money-back guarantee if you don't like it anyway. And then it comes out free on YouTube in about 2 months' time, and that's when we want people to send it all over the place, because it has so much potential to reach the lost. But it's one scientific question that proves without a doubt the existence of God, and it's very exciting.
Well, again, you got to go to atheistmovie.com to find that. And again, don't pass up livingwaters.com. Such great resources, and you over the years have done such a good job of not only challenging people to share their faith in a way that is biblically based, but also do it in a fun and interesting way. So I just appreciate the great work that you do, Ray, and thank you for joining us today here on Point of View. Let's do it again.
Thank you for having me on, Kerby. God bless you.
We are going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll take just a few other comments before we run out of time and give you a chance to kind of look at what has been taking place. Again, if you have just joined us, though, the book which we've been quoting from in large part has been Fat Chance, Why Pigs Will Fly Before America Has an Atheist President. And interesting enough, has 178 different endnotes. So there's some really good resources in there. And as you heard us talking about, for example, is it possible that George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, were they all atheists? No. And of course, we answered some of those questions. What about this argument that religion is the result of all the wars in America? Well, and all the wars in the world. And that's not true either. And so just a lot of great material that you can use. And I hope that you will use it if you find yourself engaged in a discussion or a Facebook back and forth. Those are some great resources, and all of it available at livingwaters.com. Going to take a break. When we come back, a couple of final comments before we end today. And of course, always on Friday, our weekend edition, Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford will be with us. So lots to talk about. We'll do that right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Take a few more minutes, and just before we wind the day down, I thought we might look ahead to tomorrow. It will be our weekend edition. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford will be with us. We'll be looking at some of the issues related to religious liberty. Kelly Shackelford's written a piece that we are posting, and I think that will be helpful to you. One of the topics that we really haven't addressed and we'll spend some time talking about tomorrow is the revelation now that the Obama administration secretly airlifted $400 million worth of cash to Iran, and that coincided with the January release of the 4 Americans detained in Tehran. Now, if you think about this, the arguments that's come from the last couple of days from the State Department by John Kerby and others is that this was just a coincidence. Well, I don't think anybody believes that anymore for a couple of reasons. First of all, the plane that was flown over there was an unmarked plane. Also, consider the fact that what was brought over was not American dollars. What you had were wooden pallets stacked with European euros, EU euros, and Swiss francs and other currencies. Now, that's caused some people to say, now, wait a minute. Why was that done? Well, it was done because, at least at that time, America, the United States, was not allowed to send money directly to Iran. And so it had to change it into other kinds of currencies. That's called money laundering. And Charles Kruttheimer the other day pointed out that if a business person did that, a transnational corporation did that, they would be in jail even before the trial was held, okay? So this is an issue that is, again, tied into the Obama administration and also tied back to Hillary Clinton. It may mean nothing to the average voter out there, but it's just, again, one of those issues we're going to get into in a little more detail tomorrow. So I thought we would focus on that. And we'll also get back into the debate that isn't taking place. We can spend a lot of time, and usually do not, talking about the various things that either Hillary Clinton says or more recently Donald Trump says. But there are some really important issues that are not being addressed right now in the campaign. And can recognize that the campaigns are just getting started, but certainly by Labor Day, we better get into some serious issues. And I'm not the only one saying that. William Galston is an individual that writes occasionally for the Wall Street Journal, actually served in the Clinton administration. And I used him the other day to point out, because he has been looking at some of the things that should be discussed and also was looking at the platforms. And he says, you know, if you look at the latest Pew research, nearly 2/3 of voters, that is 65%, believe that this year's presidential campaign is not focused on important policy debates. Now, as I've pointed out to you before, he says that the Democratic Party, and this is a quote from him, has embraced its most comprehensive liberal agenda ever. And again, you go through the long, long list of those things. The Republican platform and the Democratic platform, both about 50 pages. One's 54 pages, one's 52 pages. But that's about the only place where they agree. They disagree on everything else. And the Republican Party platform, he says, is more conservative. I'm saying, well, maybe on one or two issues, but pretty much it's the same platform that existed in 2012. And more to the point, Donald Trump has distanced himself from a few things in the platform. But one of the things that he says into this article, which is something I addressed in a commentary that came out last month, is he says the big story is the party's convergence on the issues of not wanting to address entitlement reform, or in other words, to address the issue of what Social Security and Medicare are going to blow up and how that is going to affect dramatically the federal budget. He says, tellingly, neither candidate seems particularly concerned about the budget deficit, the national debt, issues that sparked a government shutdown and nearly a debt default 5 years ago. Mr. Trump has dubbed himself as the king of debt, going so far as to declare, "I love debt." He explains his thinking in classic Keynesian terms. It's called priming the pump. And, of course, Hillary Clinton believes in that as well. And this is perhaps one of the more disturbing aspects of this campaign, that if you go back just 4 years ago, the current House Speaker, Paul Ryan, at that time was the vice presidential nominee. And he had actually put together a way in which we could eventually no longer have federal debt. Or at least no longer have federal deficits. We'd still have the debt, but at least the annual deficits would go away. And so this was in a way to have some kind of entitlement reform. But now, whether you look at the Republican platform or the Democratic platform, whether you look at Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, neither of them are addressing an issue that I think is going to be a great and important issue for Americans, if not for you, certainly for your children and for your grandchildren, because we're putting more and more of this debt on their backs. And it's just amazing to me that this is not an issue. The current president, Barack Obama, has essentially doubled the national debt. from George Washington to Barack Obama, we ran up in round numbers, I'm just rounding them off, $10 trillion in debt. But Barack Obama, in his 8 years, will get us to $20 trillion in debt. Think about that for a minute. He has run up as much debt in 8 years as was run up from George Washington all the way through George W. Bush. That's not a campaign issue. It certainly seems like a campaign issue, especially when, if you listened at all to the Republican convention, and even more so if you listened to the Democratic convention, every time you turned around, I heard the words cha-ching, because it had to do with the fact that each one of those candidates was talking about how to spend more money. So again, some of this has happened because we, as the American people, have just shown very little interest in covering this issue of the national debt. We've let it happen. We know that each year we pile more debt upon more debt obligations, and as a result, we have this national debt. And again, unless we make it clear that this is an issue that needs to be addressed for the financial future of this country and for the financial security of our children and grandchildren, it simply is not going to be dealt with. So sadly, I think our children and grandchildren face some very difficult financial futures simply because the candidates and we, the voters, aren't addressing the looming financial challenge. So I wanted to put that on the table, and it's, again, one more issue that we're going to be talking about tomorrow, as well as the surging of third-party candidates. This could change the electoral map dramatically. Gary Johnson is now at 7.2% in the Real Clear Politics polling averages. The Green Party candidate Jill Stein is at 3.5%. Those don't mean much if it's a complete landslide. And, of course, some are predicting a landslide for Hillary Clinton to beat Donald Trump in all sorts of states that are even red states. And if that's the case, that doesn't matter. But if you start looking at some of those swing states, and this is a close election, and I'm talking about Iowa, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Florida, if indeed those are close, and indeed it becomes a close presidential election, these third-party candidates will have a very significant impact. And certainly Ross Perot had an impact in 1992, and there is no doubt in my mind that Ralph Nader had an impact in 2000. That is very, very clear that indeed the reason George W. Bush won Florida and thus won the 2000 election is because of the significant percentage of individuals that voted for Ralph Nader who might have otherwise voted for Al Gore. So that's all we have for today, but I hope you'll join us tomorrow for our weekend edition as we cover some of these very important issues in the news. If you'd like to know a little bit more about the material we've covered today with Eric Metaxas in the first hour or Ray Comfort in the second hour, visit our website, pointofview.net. And as you go there, don't forget that, as we've talked about before, sometimes giving in August is at the lowest level. So your gift today is really needed. So take a moment to go to pointofview.net, click the donate button. Every gift is important, so please let me hear from you today. I want to thank Andrew, Catherine, and Shamila. Have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow for our weekend edition.
I had what many would call the Cadillac of insurance plans with my company. It covered everything, and that's what got us started thinking, well, what is everything? Are we indirectly paying for people to use services that we don't believe in or want to be a part of? And Metashare was the perfect answer for that.
I felt such relief switching over to Metashare. I wasn't paying for anything that I didn't believe in. I was actually able to stand up for what I believe in, and I was able to put my money where my faith is.
We're part of this great program, and it really costs us less than insurance.
Learn how thousands of Christians can help you save on your health care. For your free information guide, call 855-BIBLE-11. Not available in Montana. Metashare, affordable biblical health care. Call 855-BIBLE-11. That's 855-BIBLE-11.
Point of View Radio needs you in 2016. Join today at pointofview.net. Become a monthly partner. Pointofview.net. Or call 1-800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.